Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Chang-Jae Lee, Senior Research Fellow at the KIEP. KIEP is Korea Institute for International Economic Policy, a government think tank for advising the Korean government on the international economic policies. He has been there for more than 20 years and was working on Northeast Asia, Russia, and in the last 10 years or so, he was focusing on the Northeast Asian economic integration and cooperation. So as we have discussed in the beginning of the semester, the third week, from the first week to third week, we have planned to have East Asia week, right? East Asia sessions, and Dr. Lee Chang-Jae is crowning this East Asia sessions by introducing the CJK FTA, China, Japan, Korea FTA. So what is the prospect of this CJK FTA? What are the impediments? And how to solve the problems we are facing in Northeast Asia. So why don't you give him big hands to welcome.
Good afternoon, everybody. Actually, I'm not that used to speak, in front of students. I attended many seminars, but I think this kind of system is kind of a little bit foreign to me. Anyway, can I use this one? Okay, so today's topic is China, Japan, Korea FTA. As introduced by Dr. Park, I've been working on this issue for a while, over the past at least 10 years, 10, 15 years. Okay, so before entering the subject, I'd like to talk briefly about what has been happening in terms of trends of trade between China, Japan, Korea first. And then I'd like to review the kind of history of China, Japan, Korea FTA. Then let me talk about the rationale as well as impediments to CJK FTA. And finally, I'd like to share with you my kind of personal view. What should be done to realize the CJK FTA, as well as some kind of risk factors to it. Okay, let me begin by showing the trends of trade between China, Japan, and Korea. This left-hand figure shows shares of interregional trade between China, Japan, and Korea, as well as those of NAFTA and EU 15. So the blue line indicates China, Japan, Korea, and the red one shows NAFTA, then the green one is about EU 15. As you can see, the share of interregional trade among the three Northeast Asian countries has increased about 12-13% in 1990 to about 23% in 2010. So over the 20 years, it increased to more than 10%. But as you can see, at the same time, still the absolute level of share of interregional trade is much lower than those of NAFTA and the EU. Okay, then let me turn to the right-hand figure, which shows the shares of interregional trade between China, Japan, and Korea. That the green line here indicates the share of interregional trade of Korea. So Korea's kind of dependence on trade on Northeast Asian countries was about 22% in 1990, 20 years ago. But then it increased to about 35% in 2010. So you can see, kind of rapid increase. So Korea dependency on regional countries increased quite rapidly. And the red line indicates that of Japan. As you can see, Japan started quite low, but it increased quite rapidly as well. But when it comes to that of China, which is indicated in a blue line, China's share of interregional trade was about the 9% in about 20 years ago. Then it increased quite rapidly till 1996. Then it was at that time about 28%. Then since then, the rate continued to decrease, and it amounted to about 70% in 2010. So you can see overall the interregional trade of both Korea and Japan have tendency to rise, continue to rise over the past 20 years, while that of China went up, then continued to decrease. So what happened? So let me just go a little bit in details. Okay, here you can see China's export and import. Let me just talk about the interregional trade, which is indicated the blue line. Both in terms of export and import, the blue line is kind of went up, then went down. But the thing is, at the same time, in terms of export, you can see the green line, which represent USA, and the dotted, kind of purple line is EU. So you can see China's trade more and more export more and more to USA and EU, while China's export to Japan and Korea continue to decrease. But the situation is quite different when it comes to China's import. As you can see, China continues to rely heavily on imports from Japan and Korea. Okay, so let me show the Japan situation. As you can see, the blue line, both in terms of export and import, have risen quite rapidly over the past 20 years. At the same time, over the 20 years, for example, when you look at the green line, which represent that of USA, you can see Japan's kind of I mean, U.S. Represented quite high level of share of Japan's export in 1990, but its share continued to decrease over the past 20 years. And similar things happened in terms of import as well. Okay, finally, when it comes to Korea, as you can see, Korea, it shows type is almost similar to that of Japan, while the Korea's share of interregional trade is even higher than that of Japan. Okay, and then let me show this. This table shows the share of export of China, Japan, Korea, production by production process with major trading partners. I don't know, go into too details. I think it'll make you kind of sleepy. So anyway, let me just show you that I don't know, is this sure? Okay. So as you can see, recently in 2009, the share of intermediate goods among the, as for the interregional trade, so here it's just showing just export. 3 countries, among them, they trade most of them, mostly intermediate goods. So 61%. While the consumption, for example, they export only 16% of the consumption to regional countries. But when you look at, for example, U.S. market, they export only about 33% to U.S., while the consumption goods represent 37%. So it's not just the CJK issue, but even among the East Asian countries, we basically trade intermediate goods. Then we send those final goods either to USA or Europe. So that is kind of general pattern. So even among the China, Japan, Korea, it's same. So when you look at the ASEAN figure, it's almost like interregional trade among the 3 countries. Okay, now let me enter the CJK FTA. So this first I like to. I think you're looking at these one. Okay, so for example, Korea, this one, FTA concluded by China, Japan, Korea. In terms of number of bilateral or plurilateral FTA agreements, Japan had the most. But you can see all 3 countries have concluded a number of FTAs. And in terms of a kind of quality, you can see since Korea concluded FTA with both United States and the European Union, I think Korea is more advanced than other regional countries when it comes to the FTAs. And as you can see, in addition, on top of those already concluded FTAs, there are many FTAs negotiation going on by Korea in Japan and China. But among them, the most important one when it comes to CJK FTA is the Korea-China FTA. I'll be back on this issue. So I just showed you that all 3 countries have concluded many FTAs. But then what happened among China, Japan, Korea? Unfortunately, we don't have any bilateral, not to mention trilateral FTA so far. As for Korea-Japan FTA, Korea-Japan FTA negotiations started in December 2003, but have been stalled since November 2004. As for Korea-China FTA, we started FTA negotiation this year, and so far we had already 3 rounds of negotiations. So finally, CJK FTA. Actually, there was trilateral joint research on CJK FTA among 3 institutions, namely Development Research Center, DRC, which is under State Council of China, and NIRA, it started with NIRA, then changed it to ID JETRO for Japan. And for Korea, my institute, the KIEP, has participated from the beginning. So we worked on CJK FTA issue. Actually, we wanted to work on this issue, but especially Japanese government was quite reluctant. So we had to kind of tone down the subject. So actually the title of our subject of our joint research was economic effects of a possible FTA between China, Japan, and Korea. So we have been working. Actually, we wanted to conduct a joint study about 3-4 years, but we were forced by the government to continue because even Japanese government, which was not really ready and which was reluctant to the subject, but it didn't want to lose the momentum. So we continued to work on this issue for 7 years. Then in 2009, I say we because I've been involved, from the beginning. So it's a little bit personal to me. But anyway, we recommended after 7 years of study, we recommended the 3 governments to upgrade our research kind of academic level to official tripartite joint study, including government officials. That's what, we managed to persuade the 3 governments in 2009, and then leaders of 3 countries, when they got together at the trilateral summit meeting, which was held in Beijing in October 2009, they agreed to launch official tripartite joint study, which was kind of formally named the Joint Study Committee for CJK-FTA. And the Joint Study Committee started its work in May 2010 and concluded the study in December last year. And at the trilateral summit meeting, which was held in Beijing in May this year, finally the leaders agreed to launch FTA talks within this year. So, with many things going on these days, like territorial dispute, we cannot be sure, but I think we will have our first negotiation on CIGIC FTA probably in November this year. So let me turn to the why we do need CIGIC FTA. At all, I mean, first of all, in my view, the first reason I can think of is very plain. That is China, Japan, and Korea are neighboring countries. It can be a little bit maybe strange to you when I say that, but when you remind of the fact that the FTA is a kind of basic, kind of low level of RTA, which is Regional Trade Agreement. So an RTA is usually, as the name indicates, is among the regional countries. So, what happened in Europe, as you can see, Europe, then NAFTA, and Mercosur, or AFTA, among ASEAN countries. But among the, three Northeast Asian countries, as I showed you that all three countries concluded a number of FTAs respectively, but still there is no FTA among them. It seems to me, I call it abnormal. There's something wrong. So it's time to correct this abnormality by forming a CIGIC FTA. So, and my second rationale I can think of is that three countries are not just neighboring countries, but as I showed you, all three countries are major trading partners for each other. So, as you can see, China's dependency, is about I think about 70% overall, and Japan is about I think 27%, and Korea is almost 35%. So you can see all three countries are not just neighboring countries, but they depend highly on other countries for their trade. So it's natural, it seems to me, that three countries form an FTA to further enhance intra-regional trade among the three countries. Then, why at this moment, we should form a CIGIC FTA? As you know well, that now United States and EU countries are having economic difficulties in the wake of global financial crisis, as well as the European fiscal crisis. So we cannot expect to continue to depend on those markets, US and European market. Then we should create regional market among the Northeast Asian countries or East Asian countries. So the larger regional market is needed. That's my third point I would like to make. And fourth point is kind of related to the third one. As I said, that we do need regional market, and we do need a region-wide FTA in East Asia. I will not go into detail, but the process of forming the region-wide FTA in East Asia, called these days RCEP, Regional Comprehensive economic partnership is underway. Maybe I'll just come back later a little bit on this issue. So in order to achieve a regional-wide FTA, these days, we're talking about the RCEP, we do need any kind of FTA among the three countries, either CJK FTA or at least bilateral FTAs among the three countries. So a CJK FTA could facilitate the formation of a regional-wide FTA in East Asia. That's the fourth reason why I think at this juncture of history, we do need a CJK FTA. Another rationale I can think of is that, as you know, all three countries are quite strong manufacturing countries. They are very competitive in manufacturing worldwide. But when it comes to service sectors, they are relatively weak. They are behind. So in order to enhance the level of service sectors in the three countries, I think the best way is to form an FTA among the three countries, trying to liberalize not just trade in goods, but trade in services. Then why, with all those kind of rationale, we could not form an FTA so far? Because we do have some serious obstacles. First obstacle is all three countries have sensitive sectors. It's not just for CJK FTA, but for all kinds of FTAs. We have problem. We have difficulties in forming an FTA because each country has many sensitive sectors. So when you talk about the FTA, usually the benefit is kind of general. So people don't really feel the benefit. But when it comes to the sensitive sectors, the costs are quite specific and concrete and immediate. So people tend to kind of resist to any kind of new liberalization of each sectors. So I can think of is this kind of it begins from economic reasons, then touch upon the domestic politics. But as for CJK FTA, in my view, the non-economic factors are as important as the economic difficulties. So I call non-economic factors like historical legacies, kind of remnants of our past history. As you know, when we talk about the comforts woman, those kind of issues, a lot of people get kind of very emotional, and it's kind of very difficult to talk about, for example, Korea-Japan FTA. And as I mentioned earlier, the territorial disputes are the kind of most hot topic these days. Senkaku Islands, Dokdo issue is kind of very emotional, and it's hard to deal with. It's not just among economists, but its general public is quite sensitive on this issue. Then kind of regional rivalry, especially between, I think we have some Japanese and Chinese students here. They know that the rivalry is sometimes quite real, and it constitutes another major impediment to forming regional-wide FTA. Then the lack of a community spirit. I don't know, still among the Northeast Asian countries, public in general, we don't feel we are living in a regional community. And not many people think that we are Northeast Asian. Unlike European. Of course, European, a long time ago, they felt less. But anyway, compared to Europeans or North Americans, I think Northeast Asians are not really feeling that we are in a regional community. Another thing is, I think maybe the last but not least important issue is the lack of political leadership. Okay, I think, I don't need any further explanation for the lack of political leadership because I'm not a political scientist, so I will just, I think you can understand this issue better than myself. Then after talking about all those impediments, let me come back to to benefit side. Because, as I mentioned, that historical legacies and territorial disputes are commonly cited impediments to CJK FTA. But when you reverse the way of thinking, in my view, by forming a CJK FTA, we could greatly reduce regional political and security tension in the region. So instead of saying that because of past history or regional, the territorial disputes, we cannot form a CJK FTA, but I think it's time to reverse the way of thinking and to be more positive. And by forming a CJK FTA, we can reduce regional tension in Northeast Asia. So as I said that, the situation in Northeast Asia is still abnormal. So I think CJK FTA would be the beginning of a normalization of relationship in Northeast Asia. And especially for Korea, unfortunately, Korea Peninsula is still divided. So in my view, it could be just personal, so I don't know, maybe political scientists will say some other things, but in my view, the CJK FTA would create a favorable environment for North Korea's open door policy and ultimately the Korean reunification. I say this not because I have a certain feeling, but as you know, when you remind of the fact that at the initial period of European economic integration, it was not just economic motivation, but the main motive was the prevention of another war in Europe. I think since Dr. Park was educated in Germany, I think he could tell you more, maybe graphically. So, I don't know. Let me enter my final section of my presentation. So, what kind of FTA CJK FTA would be? To do that, to explain or to what it could be, let me talk about the Joint Study Committee for CJK FTA. Actually, what they did was they examined possible trilateral FTA without prejudice to the future position of the three countries in a possible trilateral FTA negotiations. Because I participated in the joint committee, and it was very difficult. Even it's a joint study, but since a lot of countries were sensitive, So they don't want to include even in the study, the kind of sensitive sectors to each country. So finally, we agreed to, we include in the study will not necessarily kind of influence the real negotiation. It's just study. So what I'm saying from now on is it's not certain that everything will be like this. But anyway, that's the what we agreed in our joint study. The scope and coverage of a CJK FTA is just like other countries, starting from trading goods and trading services and investment and other issues like TBT, technical barriers to trade, and SPS, and intellectual property rights, and transparency, competition policy, and dispute settlement mechanism, etc., and so on and so forth. So nothing kind of special. It's just it's just like other FTAs. Then we agreed on the guiding principles for negotiating a CJK FTA. First principle is we should aim at a comprehensive and high-level FTA, so-called high-quality FTA. So we aim high. Of course, second principle is it should be consistent with WTO rules. It's just normal. Then third principle was to strive for a balanced result and achieve, I don't know if it's the correct English, but win-win-win situation. Okay? Then the final principle was we should conduct negotiation with due consideration to the sensitive sectors in each country. So when you look at those four guiding principles, the first kind of principle is kind of very idealistic. But at the same time, you have a fourth principle, which is quite pragmatic. So, you can have, we will start, we will aim high, but I think we'll be realistic and pragmatic. Then we agreed on the recommendation. On the recommendation, we included just one particular recommendation. Actually, even for this recommendation, it was very hard because we could not build a consensus whether we include in the recommendation or not. But anyway, we included that the Joint Study Committee shares the view that strong political will would be needed during the entire process for CJK FTA. I mentioned that the lack of leadership was a serious impediment to a possible CJK FTA. So when we concluded the joint study on CJK FTA, a lot of people felt still the need to underscore the fact that without strong political will, this CJK FTA could not be realized. So then what will be most important decision to make when it comes to negotiations? In my view, the most important thing we have to decide is whether we'll go for truly a trilateral FTA or some of bilateral FTAs. That means whether we'll have a CJK FTA or we'll have, practically speaking, Korea-China FTA, Korea-Japan FTA, and the China-Japan FTA. So kind of we combine those bilateral FTAs, especially when it comes to the trade in goods. Another thing is, related to that is, same thing, but when I use a little bit more technical expression, whether the key issue would be whether we will have a common concession approach. That means when we open, for example, one sector, agricultural product, then we should open either both Japan and China, or we'll open a certain sector only to China or only to Japan. So I don't know whether you have, you can imagine in reality. So when you want to have a common concession approach, it's so-called higher quality. So it's truly trilateral. But in many cases so far, all those plural FTAs, we used bilateral approach. So we open this product just to, for example, one country, and to another countries, we have a different set of concession tables. So I, as an academic and as someone who spent much time on CJK FTA, ideally I prefer a common concession approach. But realistically, I think it's more likely to have kind of some of bilateral FTAs. So, okay, maybe, so when you, during a Q&A session, if you ask me kind of more questions, I'll elaborate on this issue. Another thing is, I talk about the RCEP just briefly, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is initiative of ASEAN countries. So ASEAN countries, as most of you maybe know, formed already FTA with China, Japan, Korea, and Australia, New Zealand, and lastly with India. So there has been some attentive efforts. Some efforts have been made to realize region-wide FTA in East Asia. So EFTA and CPA. EFTA is meaning that East Asia FTA, free trade area, and CPA is Comprehensive Economic Partnership in East Asia. Anyway, but those efforts were kind of failed, or at least failed to realize a regional-wide FTA in East Asia. So now the ASEAN took the leadership, and ASEAN leaders agreed ASEAN framework for RCEP in November last year. And at the last summit, which was held April this year, the leaders agreed to launch the RCEP at the next summit, which will be November this year. So, as I told you, probably the first CJK FTA negotiation will start in November this year, and we will have almost at the same time, we'll launch regional-wide FTA in East Asia as well. RCEP, in which all three countries, China, Japan, and Korea, will participate. So there will be two region-wide FTA negotiations starting in November this year. The thing is, the most important task would be how to coordinate CJK FTA with that of RCEP. So far, I don't think it's possible, but according to the principle, guiding principle of RCEP, RCEP wants to go for concession, the common concession approach. That means very idealistic. So if RCEP adopts, for example, common concession approach, CJK should adopt same approach. Otherwise, we will have a totally different negotiation after CJK FTA among the three countries using a common concession approach according to when we negotiate the RCEP. So it's quite important to coordinate these two region-wide FTA. So maybe, if it was not that clear, maybe I can come back on this issue later. Then, what are the risk factors to forming a CJK FTA? Of course, there are many interest groups which will resist to FTA because they belong to sensitive sectors. But as I mentioned earlier, territorial disputes and historical legacies and the lack of political leadership will be, in my view, key risk factors to forming a CJK FTA. And finally, I'd like to conclude my presentation and underscoring that CJK FTA is not just FTA, it's more than FTA. Because normal FTA's main purpose of forming just an FTA is to produce economic benefits through trade and investment liberalization. But in my view, CJK FTA has another dimension, kind of not just economic dimension, but political and security dimension. So in my view, CJK FTA could be a first step toward peaceful and prosperous Northeast Asia. So I'd like to just, send you my kind of personal message that the CJK FTA is an FTA, but it has an dimension. Okay, thank you very much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, as you are well aware, Dr. Lee was very successful in completing his presentation within 45 minutes, as we have discussed. And you have more than 20 minutes now to have discussion with him. Why don't you raise questions? Daniel?
Hi.
Just before that, I don't know, it's just in this session, but I can feel that you are very good students. Usually after session, when ask a Q&A session, when you ask somebody from the floor, there's no, there's a calm, sudden calm then, but I saw many hands up.
Dr.
Okay.
Lee, you are at Korea University.
Okay. I realize that.
Okay, my question was, Professor Park gave a presentation a few weeks ago about regionalization in East Asia. and he mentioned the role of external stakeholders and how that can be an issue in forming an East Asian bloc. I was wondering what exactly would the external stakeholders' role be within this process, and if they do have an influence on this outcome, what exactly are their mechanisms of influencing?
I didn't catch your last.
If external stakeholders do have an influence on this process, what are their mechanisms for influencing it?
Influencing the CJKFTA?
Yeah.
I don't know what you talk about the stakeholders. By that, you mean other countries or?
Primarily like the USA and I suppose Russia
yeah.
as well.
Okay, so that is another issue I didn't mention. I used to talk about that, especially. I mean, are you an American or?
Canadian.
Oh, you're Canada, from Canada. Okay, I have something with all my family members except myself. They are Canadians. So okay, anyway, so. Of course, for the United States, since both Korea and Japan is security allies to United States, and U.S.-China relationship is not still that clear. I mean, ambivalent. So U.S. could not be that happy to see the formation of a CJKFTA. But actually, a lot of my American colleagues used to say that, among the three countries, you cannot really agree on CJKFTA. So it's impossible. So that was kind of their attitude. But finally, I mean, after almost 10 years, now we are supposed to start the negotiation. So U.S. can be a little bit nervous, but since for me, I was a kind of advocate of a CJKFTA, so I don't feel any that kind of sensitivity right now because we already formed the FTA with United States first. So I think Korea can play that kind of role. Because since we form an FTA with the United States and Northeast Asian countries are not that liberal in terms of opening the markets. So by forming a CJKFTA in Northeast Asia, I think we could help to liberalize trade, even globally or regionally in Asia Pacific region. So. I don't think these days, actually several years ago, there was kind of raised, even, myself, I talked about that issue quite often, but these days not many people talk about that because I think U.S. will be kind of more sensitive on RCEP or region-wide FTA in East Asia. And I mean that. So I mean, as you know, on the other side there is a TPP going on. So TPP could be regarded as the kind of U.S. reaction to not just CJKFTA, but rather to a region-wide FTA in East Asia. I think U.S. position is not like about 10 or 15 years ago. U.S. didn't really want to allow that kind of region-wide economic bloc. But I think it's quite different these days. So U.S. In my view, doesn't really feel that it's not proper. But since the U.S. is not participating in region-wide economic integration, so that's one of the reasons why U.S. chose to lead the TPP. But at the same time, as you know, U.S. joined last year East Asia Summit. Of course, the East Asia Summit is a little bit different. We don't talk about the FTA within East Asia Summit, but because of the TPP, but so still, I mean, right now it goes beyond the CJK FTA issue, but the key issue in terms of regional economic integration in East Asia or Asia Pacific is there will be some kind of competition going on between TPP and newly created or to be established RCEP, in my view. Yeah.
James.
Hi. Do you believe Japan and Korea are on equal leverage? They have equal leverage with China, or do you think it would be important for them to form a bilateral agreement first that would give them the power to force the concessions that they want from China?
I think, as I said, that Korea already started bilateral FTA negotiation with China, and probably I think Korea will start not within this year, but FTA negotiation with Japan. But the problem is between China and Japan. I mean, it's not easy to just, say, I mean, because I cannot really predict, but normally it is not that easy to form bilateral FTA between Japan and China. So, in my view, a lot of Japanese business leaders, business persons, other people, they prefer to go for a CJK FTA because they know it's not easy to go for bilateral FTA with China. But when we just launched CJK FTA, then we decide to choose not trilateral way, but at least in some aspects, bilateral negotiation. For example, in terms of trade in goods, like Korea, China, Korea, Japan. Then they have to start, bilateral FTA with China. So I think your question is maybe is not that. I mean, normally it's easier to form bilateral FTA than trilateral FTA. I mean, you're right, but the thing is, it's not just logical all the time. So sometimes trilateral FTA could be easier than a series of bilateral FTAs. I don't know whether I answered to your question.
So, Seol-Jang-hwan.
My question is kind of simple. When you were mentioning about the trilateral FTA between CJK, you mentioned that if this becomes possible, that reunification between South and North might be more easier. Mm-hmm. And I just wanted to hear more details about that. How is this?
Okay, so yeah. Actually, although I mentioned that, it's a little bit difficult for an economist to argue, those kind of things because then the political scientists will not have anything to say, right? So anyway, without going too far away, I think just imagine when we form an FTA, both China and Korea, Japan. So we go. It doesn't. Trade FTA is a trade agreement, but it has just bilateral FTA has certain political implication, right? So, but trilateral FTA with China, Japan, Korea, it will create much more, as I said, much more much strong or important ramification for all three countries and in the region. Then, of course, for North Korea, the closest ally is China right now. But if relationship between Korea and China is getting closer, not just two, but with Japan, I think it'll create. I mean, it'll not necessarily lead to kind of unification or whatever. No, it's not like that. But it will, in my view, it would create much more favorable environment for North Koreans. I think I'm not in the shoes of when I put my in the shoes of Kim Jong-un. I think I would be more pressed or feel maybe it's time to change the policy and to join the what's going on in the region.
Let's come back to this side, Jamie.
Hi. You discussed that political will is the most important part of facilitating the FTA. Do you think there's enough political will right now for this to go forward? And how do you think that that these three countries can gain greater political will?
The last sentence I could not.
How can they foster more political will for the FTA?
Okay, so first of all, why do I say the political will is important? Once again, when we look what happened in Europe, it was not really kind of bottom-up process. It was the leaders' decision. It was a top-to-bottom approach. So it was the leaders or elite of European countries who decided to form some kind of the integration. To start the integration process. Even in this part of the world, because I think we do need that kind of leadership, because otherwise, a lot of politicians in general, they are more keen to domestic politics, domestic economy. So now, I don't know, I could be wrong, but what's going on these days in terms of territorial disputes, those things have, I think, some is kind of reflect the politicians' yearning for that kind of some populism. So they want to use those kind of nationalism to increase his or her popularity domestically. So what I'm saying is, we do need a political will from the leaders. I think we should have some political leaders in the three countries who can think of beyond his or her political constituency. So that's what I'm saying.
배은지.
First of all, thank you for your lecture. And from your view, what would be the most beneficial goods or sector for Korea through CJK FTA?
Very difficult question. Actually, I'm a member of KIEP, which is a kind of leading institution for Korea's ODA. But in my view, you can never tell. You will benefit in which sector. FTA is we are just lowering the barrier, tariff, mainly a tariff barrier. Then it's up to the business people who take opportunity of kind of newly created environment. So for me as an economist, I mean, when you lower the tariff barriers in 3 countries, all 3 countries will benefit. But who will benefit the most? Then it's up to each country's business sector to respond. For example, now I was also educated in Europe. I was educated in France a long time ago. But at that time, nobody could really imagine. Then you will see when Europe integrates, you will see Finland specializing in IT, like kind of coming up with a company like Nokia. So it's FTA is we are trying to build a kind of a level playing field. Then it's up to the Korean business people in each sector to take this opportunity. But the reason I'm especially maybe is I'm too nationalistic in that sense, but I think Koreans when they have some difficulties, they can do better. So that's one of the reasons why I feel FTA is good to Koreans, because when we are facing some challenges from abroad, I mean, we used to did well. So I think we'll continue to do that at least for 10, 20 years. After that, it's up to the Koreans here to see whether I will continue to do that at that time. Yeah, but.
Laila?
You mentioned earlier sensitive factors, and I was wondering whether you could elaborate and define some of them, please.
Can I somehow?
Earlier in the presentation, you
would you
defined
repeat,
some
Yeah.
sensitive sectors.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering whether you could elaborate a bit more and define some of these
Okay.
sectors, please. Thank you.
I mean, it's easy for that. I mean, it's easier than the previous question, because I mean, we have a very strong opposition from agriculture sector, because Korean agriculture sector is not that competitive. So that's why we had difficulties when we tried to form FTA even with Chile. We thought that Chile is far away, and we don't have many common agricultural products. And the season is the opposite. So, but even with Chile, we had a strong kind of opposition from the agriculture sector, and we had the same thing, much kind of harder when we tried to form an FTA with the United States. Because of the the beef issue mainly. So then, especially with China, for Korean, with Japan, Japan is the only country with which we can negotiate agricultural sector. Actually, Korea feels that we are comfortable with the Japanese at least. But with China, we are consuming basically, we are in same neighboring countries. We are eating a similar foodstuff, and so even right now, it's kind of Chinese agricultural products are kind of very sensitive issue right now. So if we want to form an FTA with China, it'll be quite sensitive. I mean, that's one of the reasons I was personally surprised to see the the launch of Korea-China FTA, this year. I thought that it will happen probably next year, because we are in a political season. But somehow the Korean governments had some courage to start the negotiation with China. So, to answer your question, mainly agriculture sector.
Many hands. Let's take two more. One here, one there, right? Jason.
A common theme that has come up in both our lectures on East Asian regionalism so far has been political leadership. And so exclusively with China, Japan, Korea, FTA, which country between the three do you feel is most likely to provide that political leadership to get something like this done?
Okay, I think theoretically, I think China, because China's leadership doesn't really have to worry about the kind of opposition, relative speaking, with domestic constituency. And China has its own power, a lot of, not just in East Asia, but over the world, a lot of people are watching China, because China is just getting bigger and bigger. But we have Japan, who used to be number 2 in terms of economic power, but now number 3. So when China really wants to lead, Japan will not be that comfortable. So in my view, not because Korea has a kind of stronger political leadership, but since we have to deal with both China and Japan, Korea can play or assume the kind of intermediary role to facilitate some kind of economic integration among the 3 countries, as well as with the ASEAN countries as well. So that's my personal view, but that does mean that Korean politicians is up to that expectation. So we should elect a right person, this year.
Charlene.
May I ask 3 questions or just one?
One question.
Okay. I'll ask one question.
Most important.
Okay. During the studies, I think you talked a lot about the future of certain sectors in all the 3 countries. I want to ask something about China's automotive industry, because since most foreign automobile companies' way of enter China is by joint venture with the state-owned companies in China, and in our I'm a Chinese, by the way. In our country, most cars like Hyundai is Beijing Hyundai, and we regard that as domestic cars. And compared to the domestic cars, we prefer the cars that imported from foreign countries, that like they are pure Hyundai, not Beijing Hyundai. And so, if the if the FTA someday is realized, the import tax on those cars will be largely reduced, and foreign cars will be much popular than domestic cars in China. But now the Chinese automotive industry is
Charlene,
just.
are you writing a paper or ask a
So,
question?
okay.
Right?
Now China's industry is just started to growing some private companies like Chery and some other companies. And some opinions are that this FTA will be a disaster for China's private automotive industry. Do you think so?
Okay, so I think you said some answers already. When you look at the automobile sector among the three countries, of course, you may say Japan is first, Korea second, and China is vulnerable. But as you said, that many Japanese car makers and Korean car maker Hyundai in Beijing already there. So and not just the Korean or Japanese, but a lot of European cars makers are there, and as well as the American cars. So actually, from my experience, automobile industry is not that sensitive sector to China. Because China is quite competitive, and I don't know whether realize China is the country which produced the most cars in the world, including commercial vehicles. So China is not that sensitive. On top of that, FTA doesn't mean that we abolish the tariff to zero immediately. So we can exclude some sensitive products like automobile, for example, to China. Either you just eliminate, during the whole negotiation, or you can have a kind of phase-out period up to normally 10 years. So you can reduce, for example, if the tariff rate is 20%, you can rate, lower the tariff within 10 years to make 0 or to 5% or something like that. So, that's what the negotiation is for. So another thing is, since you have normally about 10 years for certain sectors, and when you think of kind of very drastic change in terms of the foreign exchange rate, actually 10% of FTA, within several years, it's not that hard to do that. But the thing is, like, for example, rice in Korea or in Japan, it is quite sensitive. It is, a lot of people think that, rice, without rice, Korean cannot survive. I don't think so, but anyway, a lot of people share that kind of thing. So then even Korea, US FTA, and in Korea, EU FTA, excluded, I said eliminated or excluded the rice sector, rice product. So, of course, each country has sensitive sectors, but that's why we negotiate. We keep some and get some back. So that's what negotiations for. Another thing is, it's not just for the trading goods. We have sub-sectors and investment and all others. So it has a larger picture.
Totally. There seem to be some students who cannot sleep tonight without having asked questions to you. So I'd like to have one last questions, 장인철 and Laura.
Hi, I actually read some articles from like a couple of months ago, and about like CJK FTA, and it says, maybe the writer said, Japan does not have that much interest in CJK FTA because they do not want to see China and Korea's cooperation, or China and Korea's FTA, bilateral FTA. So in your perspective, do you think Japan does have that much interest or like benefits from CJK FTA compared to those China and Korea?
A very good question, maybe to end. Actually, I don't want to be a specific in terms of which country is for or against. But so far, the country which was most active in pursuing CJK FTA was China, and the country who has been most rather reluctant or less active was Japan, and Korea was in between. Korea was in between mainly because Korea was busy in forming an FTA with countries like United States and EU. So we didn't have that kind of capacity left to deal with with China and Japan, because, which are very large important countries. Having said that, and Japan was, as I said, the most reluctant to CJK FTA. But when just before the trilateral summit meetings, which was held in May of this year, before there was an economic ministers meeting where they, upon the recommendation of a joint study committee for CJK FTA, three ministers discussed the CJK FTA, and at that time, Japan was most active, and they proposed even, the Japanese delegation proposed to start negotiation immediately. Actually, and Korea was most reluctant. Actually, when I heard that, it was really surprising to me, who have been working on that issue and tried to persuade Japanese colleagues or even government officials, But the thing is, actually, just before that, Korea agreed to launch FTA negotiation with China. So Japan was really surprised, I think, and they worried about they were just left alone. Japan was very aggressive in, demanding the start of the launch of the negotiation right away. But Korea was in a very difficult position because with Korea from the many FTAs, but strong opposition, as I mentioned, in some sensitive sectors. So we set up new mechanism to start any new FTA negotiation. So we have to go through a series of domestic procedures to pass. To agree to launch FTA. So that's why Korea was more reluctant, and because we could not really accept a Japanese proposal. So, to wrap it up, I think Japan used to be more reluctant, but I don't think Japan will be reluctant in the CJK FTA negotiation. But there's one if. If Japan can join TPP, maybe Japan will be less active or for CJK FTA. But in my view, realistically, it is going to be much more easier for Japanese government to negotiate CJK FTA than entering the TPP, which will be a much higher level FTA, which will push Japanese government to liberalize agriculture sector much more radically. In my view, Japanese government will not be able to do so. To just answer your question, I don't think Japan will be reluctant, will be active. Yeah.
Laura, the last question.
Thank you for your presentation. My question is about that you mentioned that sensitive sectors might be a barrier to the trilateral FTA. And I was wondering if it would be possible, if you think that there would be the political will to have more of a phase-based program so that they wouldn't have to deal with all of the costs immediately and that it would be spread out over time. Do you think that would be possible?
Can you repeat your question?
Oh, yes. So the sensitive sectors, do you think that there would be the political will to have a phase-based FTA program so that they do not have to deal with all of the immediate costs at the same time, and that maybe that would make it less stressful?
Okay, so that's why we are talking about kind of high-level FTA, or we don't say low-level FTA, but medium-level FTA. Of course, as I showed you, when we participated in the Joint Study Committee, we produced the governing principle, which aims high, but with due consideration to sensitive sectors in each country. So if we want to just phase out all the kind of liberalization period in 10 years or something like that, we could create a very low quality FTA. For example, Korea concluded FTA with India, where the level of liberalization is quite low. But it's a kind of exception. But when three countries, which are kind of very important economic powers in the world, we cannot go for a kind of low level of FTA. So there will be some, we should go for high level, but domestic politics dictate that we cannot do that. So we have to make some kind of compromise. So that's what the negotiations are all about. So I don't know whether it was.
So, ladies and gentlemen, due to the unexpected special lecture by the Ecuadorian Vice Minister for Education last week, I could not discuss the positions of China, Japan, Korea, US, and probably ASEAN in my presentation. I will do it in the later part of November, as I have uploaded my syllabus finalized one on the EKU. Take a look at, and we have some opportunity to discuss that. Number two is, if you are interested further in this topic, there is an international conference organized by KIEP and organized by Dr. Lee on Wednesday this week in Joseon Hotel. So in the afternoon of Wednesday, there will be international conference with Chinese and Japanese scholars and policymakers. I'm doing a role as a discussant in the second session, so why don't you come if you are interested. Dr. Lee is presenting paper, as well as there are several Japanese and Chinese. And I have asked Dr. Lee to present his paper here. So some part of his paper was presented here today, right? Dr. Lee is working at the KIEP, as I told you, for more than 20 years, and this institute is located about 1 hour and more drive from here, and he has to go back home another 1.5 hours from here. So he made a very long way to us to give this very excellent lecture. Why don't you give him big hands? And I promise the students who raised today hands to ask questions but did not have any opportunity will have those opportunities next week and the week after. Okay? Thank you for today. Thank you.